Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 112 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, April 18th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the state of airline competition in Canada. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all members and all meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from the microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please only use the black approved earpiece. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. Thank you for your cooperation. Once again, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format in accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses. I'm also informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of this meeting. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Appearing before us for the first hour, we have from Air Canada, David Rowe, Vice President, Government and Community Relations. Bienvenue. We have from Air Transat, Mr. Howard Liebman, Vice President, Government Relations. Welcome to you, sir. And we have from WestJet Airlines, Andrew Gibbons, Vice President, External Relations. Welcome once again. We'll begin with opening remarks. You will each have 5 minutes, and for that, I will start with you, Mr. Rowe. La parole est à vous. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Bonjour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm pleased to appear before you today. Air Canada est fier des services qu'elle offre aux Canadiens. Nous servons plus de 180...
Air Canada is proud of the services it provides Canadians. We serve more than 180 airports worldwide, including 15 in Canada. In 2023, we deployed nearly 55 million seats, welcomed more than 46 million passengers, whom I'd like to thank for choosing us. In domestic market, we offered Canadians nearly 25 million seats. We are the only carrier to serve every province every day of the year.
Close to 70 international carriers operate to Canada and compete with Canadian airlines. Some of these carriers are 2 to 3 times larger than Air Canada, including Delta Airlines, Air France KLM, British Airways, American Airlines, Turkish, and others. In fact, Canada has 3 of the world's 50 most connected globally hubs. This is a significant achievement. No other country, apart from the US and China, has 3 hubs in this ranking. This highlights that the air travel market in Canada is dynamic and competitive, and that Air Canada can compete and succeed at the global level. The level of connectivity offered by Air Canada enables trade and tourism and facilitate immigration. It allows us to employ 40,000 people and support more than 190,000 indirect jobs. There has also been a significant increase in competition in the domestic market, with other carriers increasing capacity, including WestJet, Porter, and Flair. While in 2001, Air Canada's capacity share of the domestic market was around 75%, it's currently around 43%. There are 24 airlines serving the Canadian domestic market, including 20 offering more than 50,000 seats per year. 3 carriers have more than 10% of the capacity, for a total of 82% of the capacity. Let me share with you some facts to put this into a global perspective. In Australia, Qantas has 58% of the capacity, and more than 90% of the total capacity belongs to 2 carriers. In total, there are 13 carriers. In France, Air France has 54% of the domestic capacity. 4 carriers have more than 10% for a total of 95%. There are 10 carriers. Finally, in the US, by far the largest market, 20 times bigger than Canada, probably the most competitive market in the world. 4 carriers have at least 10% of the capacity for a total of 80%. Only 28 carriers offer more than 50,000 seats per year compared to 20 in Canada. Il y a cependant des défis uniques.
There are, however, challenges unique to Canada that limit airlines' ability to stimulate the market, to offer more attractive fares, and develop our Canadian airports. First, our geography poses a particular challenge. Canada has relatively few major cities, long distances, and a difficult climate. Also, we have a model in Canada where travelers pay all the costs and some revenues are not reinvested by governments. Revising this model would make travel more affordable.
Airports pay rent to the government, which totaled around $400 million last year. They also make payment in lieu of taxes to municipalities. In addition, Canadian travelers are subject to high fees and charges. These include security fees that have risen by 30% in the 2023 budget, now exceeding $34 for an international flight. In the US, the equivalent fee is at $5.60. As well, airport improvement fees to fund infrastructure that can reach $46 per flight in Canada, compared to $5.50 in the US, where the government reinvests excise tax in the system and has announced $40 billion to support airport infrastructure. Finally, air navigation fees are also higher in Canada. L'impact du modèle canadien.
The impact of the Canadian model is well documented and has been the subject of numerous studies. Both the Senate Standing Committee on Transport and Communications 2012-2015, the Canada Transportation Act Review, the Emerson Report, and more recently, the Montreal Economic Institute have drawn the same conclusions. To quote the Emerson Report,
in charging onerous rents and taxes that undermine competitiveness. This committee issued a report last year recommending reviewing all costs imposed on airports and airlines and reinvesting all rents collected in airport infrastructure. We welcome that conclusion. In
conclusion, we are here today to reiterate the importance of adopting policies that recognize the role of our industry, which is, in the words of the Senate in 2012, a spark plug and not a toll booth. Thank you very much for your support.
Colleagues, I see that the bells are ringing for a vote. I would like to propose a unanimous consent to allow for our witnesses to conclude their opening remarks before we go to vote. Do I have unanimous consent to allow for that to happen? Seeing no objection. Mr. Liebman, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité pour l'invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the invitation. On behalf of my 5,000 colleagues at Transat. Founded in Montreal in 1987, Air Transat is an affordable, people-focused international leisure airline.
Canadians to some 54 international destinations in more than 25 countries in the Americas, Europe, and soon Africa, from 8 Canadian cities. Air Transat carries 5 million passengers every year, including 500,000 visitors to Canada. Air Transat is uniquely positioned as an affordable, reliable international air travel option for Canadians. Our 37 years in the European and Sun markets has enhanced competition and lowered prices for Canadians. Air Transat is eager to work with government and with Parliament to protect competition in Canada. Air Canada is a dominant player, offering 39% of Canada's international airline seats. To southern Sun destinations, WestJet and Sunwing together held 50% of our national market when they merged, with an over 70% share of Western Canada seats to the Sun. From Montreal to Europe, Air Canada has grown its seat offering by well over 60% since 2019. Both Montreal and Toronto airports will undergo much-needed infrastructure upgrades and construction over the coming years. Airport infrastructure, slots and gates, especially at peak times and in peak season, will be in very high demand. As the aviation experts noted to this committee on Tuesday, we will need to work closely with our airport partners and with government to ensure that access to infrastructure during the coming years of construction and beyond at our key hub airports does not impair competition, and that as dominant industry players continue to grow significantly. The COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying travel restrictions forced Air Transat, as a purely international carrier, to entirely suspend our operations in 2020 and 2021, each time making sure to repatriate tens of thousands of our customers back safely home from around the world at a cost of tens of millions of dollars. 85% of my fellow employees were laid off, and our revenues disappeared completely. In our 33-year pre-pandemic history, Air Transat never sought financial support from government. We have rebounded from the pandemic, returned to full pre-pandemic employment level of 5,000 workers, to revenues of $3 billion and to a fleet of just under 40 large commercial jets. Our previously debt-free company, which had almost $700 million of liquidities in our coffers in 2018, was able to endure thanks to some $800 million of emergency pandemic loans from the federal government under programs unanimously authorized by Parliament. Of the $800 million loans, 350 flowed directly to passengers in the form of refunds in 2021. Your intervention worked. These loans saved Transat and 5,000 jobs from the ravages of the pandemic to continue as a strong and reliable competitor in the market. And we are here to thank you for it. This was no small feat. As was noted in committee on Tuesday, Lynx is no longer in business, and Sunwing has since been acquired by WestJet. Without the pandemic and our large resulting indebtedness, Air Transat would have been in a much more favorable financial position to grow and further enhance competition in Canada. 3 years later, market conditions have evolved significantly in our industry. We recommend that the government undertake a review of the pandemic supports that were offered, how these arrangements are now operating, and whether adjustments could be made which would continue to enhance competition in the marketplace. It may sound odd for an airline to say this, but we welcome fewer restrictions on ownership. We need more capital to be able to compete. And so while we would not change ultimate ownership restriction at 49% for non-Canadians, we believe it is futile to leave the limit on a single foreign shareholder at 25%, in particular in the age of large global airline alliances. In closing, while some airlines are exiting some markets, we are offering Canadians more choice. Air Transat has entered into a new commercial joint venture with Porter Airlines, whereby both airlines will code share and offer convenient, seamless, affordable domestic and international travel options for Canadians. We will connect Porter's growing domestic and North American network with Air Transat's expanding international network. This commercial agreement is a major win for travelers and for airline competition in Canada, with expanded service to more and more cities. Merci encore une fois pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thanks again for the invitation today, and I look forward to further questions with the committee. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Liebman. Prochainement,
Thank you, Mr. Liebman.
The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee member.
I am the Vice President of External Affairs for the WestJet Group. Nous sommes heureux d'être ici pour partager notre point de vue.
We are happy to be here to share our point of view on the competitive airline industry in Canada. WestJet has been driving competition and providing Canada with more affordable air travel choices for 28 years.
Our individual has our vantage point for this discussion. WestJet is the company that made it. We took on the largest carrier when many said it could not be done. Canada is best served by a strong and profitable WestJet, but we can only do this thanks to our guests. They have a choice and they choose us. We are grateful. The democratization of Canadian air travel is indeed a WestJet achievement. In our years of serving Canadians, WestJet has cut airfares in half and increased the percentage of Canadians flying by more than 50%. Launched in '96 with 2 aircraft, 200 employees, 5 destinations and a dream, WestJet has grown to more than 180 aircraft, 14,000 employees, flying to more than 100 destinations in 23 countries. With great effort, we built an airline to serve Canada. Our plan is to continue to grow better, to connect Canadians with where they want to go, and support the recovery of our tourism industry across the nation. We are adding more routes, more services, more choices under our ambitious growth strategy that is just shy of 2 years old. While there are no barriers to entry into the Canadian marketplace, it isn't easy to grow and succeed as a new airline in Canada. First, Canada's geography and market are challenges. To take one example, in Europe, there are 100 air travel markets with a population over 500,000, while in Canada, there are 10.
Although similar in size, Europe, with a population 20 times that of Canada, has a market that can better support ultra-low-cost carriers and new market entrants.
Second, we heard experts say on Tuesday Canada has a high and uncompetitive tax and regulatory environment with high mandatory third-party fees. The most recent budget states, quote, "It is only fair that Canadians have full transparency about the full cost of their flight." We agree. This must include the mandatory third-party fees that truly drive up ticket prices. Successful American carriers have found a way to serve Canadians through U.S. border communities. They do this because there are fewer fees. To them, Canada is a low-margin, high-tax, and regulatory burdensome market. To this end, we recommend reviewing all taxes, fees, and service charges to provide greater transparency for Canadians and to provide a market environment for all carriers to thrive. This must be part of an overall review on whether the user pay model is working for a modern Canada. I'd like to briefly update from my last appearance at this committee to address the challenges we all face in the post-pandemic startup. We at WestJet are thriving once again. We have hired thousands of new staff. We are beyond 100% capacity and back to where we were before 2020. We have further expanded with new strategic routes while maximizing choice for the Canadian consumers. Our ambitious growth plan, which has been welcomed by Canadian communities in all regions, has three pillars. One, to continue to be Canada's coast-to-coast leisure champion. Two, provide Western leadership and bring strategic investments to historically underserved markets in the West. And three, return to our low-cost roots. This is what made WestJet successful and what Canadians fell in love with. We know that, we've heard that, and we are returning to what made us successful. Nous sommes fiers de faire partie.
We are proud to be part of an industry that, despite rising costs everywhere, has managed to keep prices stable and consistent.
But we can work together to make it better in partnership with government. We put forward the following recommendations for committee members. Number one, review the user pay model for a modern Canada. All government and third-party fees should be reviewed for competitiveness impacts, intermodal equity, and value for taxpayers' money. Two, officially suspend all APPR policy developments. There is agreement across all communities, chambers, airports, airlines, big and small, and provincial governments that these proposals do not help lower prices or increase competition. We do not believe changes should be contemplated until the current system works for Canadians. Currently, there is inconsistent application of these policies and huge backlogs at the Transportation Agency that need to be addressed. Thank you again for having me here today. I welcome your questions and look forward to this discussion. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbons. Colleagues, we're done with the line of questioning. I'm wondering if we want to end it there. Excuse me. With opening statements, my sincere apologies. We do only have resources, colleagues, until 1:30. And I'm wondering if you want to keep it going to allow Mr. Williams and Ms. Koutrakis to at least get to their 12 minutes. That will still leave us 6 minutes to be able to go and vote. Does that sound reasonable to colleagues? That sound okay? No objection? Okay. Seeing no objection, we'll begin with a line of questionings with Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate we're trying to get forward, and of course we're behind schedule. But I just think we wanted to make Air Canada feel comfortable being behind schedule and getting this meeting going. But I'm going to start with competition and what we're looking at here in Canada and what Canadians are feeling and what they're trying to get us to do here in committee and as parliamentarians. We really don't have a lot of competition across all markets in Canada, across all provinces. Certainly in between all destinations. And what we've seen with that are three different problems. One is that we have not a lot of competition in high frequency routes, some of them, but not all. Second, we have routes to less traveled regions in Canada that really don't have a lot of competition and sometimes only have one, and if they're lucky, two carriers going into them. And the third complaint we're hearing from Canadians is that it's really expensive to fly from Canada to international destinations compared to some Canadians who go across the border and find those cheaper flights. Mr. Rio, from Air Canada just got ranked dead last in on-time performance in North America Airlines in January 2023, 63% of flights did not arrive within 15 minutes on time. 63% of your flights. Do you believe we need more competition to have Air Canada improve that ranking?
D'abord, je vous dirais que la performance dans le premier trimestre 2023 s'est améliorée. Air Canada a amélioré sa performance et n'est pas le dernier transporteur au niveau de la
Excuse-moi,
performance en
M. Rowe,
Amérique du Nord.
ça a l'air qu'il n'y a pas de traduction. Donc, on va juste vérifier si...
Going to check, is there interpretation? Yes? Yes, okay, we're just going to continue. Yes, we do have interpretation. We're good. Hello? Oui, bonjour. Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Rowe, we're going to start again. You have now the opportunity to respond to the question of Mr. Williams, so please go ahead. Thank you very much for your question. I would tell you that when it comes to the operation performances of Air Canada, there's been a great improvement between the first semester of 2023 and the beginning of 2023. These are the stats that I saw, and I saw that we were not the last carrier in Canada. No, we're not ranked last. When it comes to competition in Canada, as I mentioned in my early comment, the competition in Canada is not the same as in other places in the world. There is a number of carrier in Canada that is 24, but how many carrier deserve how many markets? Well, it really depends on the size of each market. Of course, each carrier can go in all of those markets.
We're going to look at two major routes then between two major city centers. If we look at, and I think we look 2 weeks in the future, between two routes. So if we looked at Toronto to Ottawa to here, and then we look at Toronto to Vancouver. So Toronto, Vancouver, there's more competition, it seems. There seems to be 4 airlines, Flair and Porter and WestJet and Air Canada, who are competing. And you can get a round trip price with Air Canada for $385, which seems pretty low. But if you look at Toronto to Ottawa, it seems that you only have Porter and WestJet and Air Canada. That price goes to $585. So for a destination that is 9 times further from Toronto to Vancouver than Toronto to Ottawa, it seems that the prices go way up with not having that competition. So how do you explain that you have a price that's so much more from a local or a Toronto to Ottawa destination than from a Toronto to Vancouver destination?
Écoutez, sur les routes que vous avez mentionnées, ce sont
On the routes that you mentioned, that's routes where there is competition. So the price for each of these routes is determined on the respective market factors. I cannot comment on the specific example that you are talking about because I don't have them in front of me. But for each route, the price depends on the market condition, the inventory that's available, the offer and supply, the type of planes that is being used between those various cities in Canada.
Mr. Gibbons, you talked about government fees. Certainly, we look from fees south of the border to Canada. They seem to be different in different major centers. Why does Canada have so much more taxes and so much more fees than the Americans do? And how does that stop either your airline entering to other routes like you've said you want to, or new airlines from coming into Canada?
Well, I think what's of value here, Mr. Williams, is what the American carriers have to say about why they avoid Canada, right? Their testimony, whether it's the president of Southwest or JetBlue or what have you, these are some of the most successful low-cost carriers in the world. And their public comments about why they avoid the Canadian market and serve it from American airports, I think is the most critical testimony I think you could find. What's the reason? I think, like I said in my original comments, I don't think we have a tax and regulatory environment for a modern Canada. I think there was a time where air travel was not the essential connective tissue of Canada as it is today. And I think we see that in issues like, and I have nothing against rail, but we see that in issues like the rail subsidy, where, you know, passengers from Moncton to Montreal are very heavily subsidized on a train. And is that essential for Canada today? We are now the essential mode for Canada, and it's not about us versus them. It's about a regulatory environment that believes that all modes should be treated equally and that we should prioritize a different psychology and culture around aviation.
We look at aviation too. There's certain taxes that get added when we look at the example I gave before, WestJet still fits in that higher category as well. It seems to be cheaper between Toronto, Vancouver than Toronto and Ottawa. When it comes to taxes, let's talk about one tax that airlines have on fuel, the carbon tax. Is there a carbon tax between Toronto and Ottawa, and is there one between Toronto and Vancouver?
There is not a carbon tax for inter-provincial travel. There is a carbon tax for intra-provincial travel. So from Toronto to Ottawa, I believe it exists. And for intra-provincial flights in our industry, it does apply as part of the backstop.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Next, prochainement, we have Ms. Koutrakis. The floor is yours. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to advise that I will be yielding 2 minutes of my time to my colleague, Mr. Iacono. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing before our committee once again. I'm sure that you've become regulars in the last little while, and thank you for your testimony. My first question is to Mr. Réau. Au cours de la dernière réunion, des témoins.
During the last meeting, some witnesses stated, and I'm going to quote here, we should not weaken the national carrier, but we should focus our efforts on the creation of a space in the industry in which the carriers, the low-cost carrier, can prosper. So my question is that, do you agree with this? And can you please tell us what is necessary to encourage this kind of environment? Thank you very much for your question. Of course, I agree that Air Canada is a pride for Canada, not only for travel in Canada, but also to link to the world. It is good for the country. But yes, there are ways to work together to encourage the market conditions so that all the carriers can be more competitive, including on an international level. So we could review, for example, the tax and fees that are imposed. Your colleague Williams talked about the fact that there are several American carriers that serve Canada from directly on the other side of the border. We have an airport in Blackburn, qui s'appelle the Montreal Lewis Airport, and I think this is, a sign. It shows that American carriers and others, but also just Canadian passengers will just cross the border because they want to take plane. I think there's something that can be done, to keep those passengers in Canada because that's money and jobs. Do you have any recommendation on how we could do this? Yes. As I said in my comments, the committee had already had this recommendation that we should review the tax and fees. Second of all, we could review how this could be reinvested in the industry. The rent for airports, it's money that's being given to the government of Canada. And I think it was mentioned at committee last year, we should have the option to take this money and reinvest it in infrastructure. We're not saying give it back to the carriers. We're saying just reinvest it in infrastructure so that the infrastructures are more modern, they're more competitive on a world level.
And very quickly, I will go to Mr. Gibbons, and thank you for your testimony. Mr. Gibbons, this is, as you know, a study on the recent events of Lynx Air. So I'd be curious to know from you, how did you benefit from the closure of Lynx Air?
We don't see it. We don't sit around and calculate benefit when an airline fails. And as I said in my remarks, we are the company that succeeded and so many others have not. So it's not a day of joy around our office when an airline fails, and actually competition makes us stronger. I'd submit to this committee, we've made Air Canada stronger. Air Transit has made us stronger. New carriers make us stronger. So it's not a day of celebration for us. What I can tell you is what we're doing to serve that market. And what we're doing to serve that market is reconfiguring all of our aircraft so that there is an ultra low cost part of the cabin on every WestJet airplane. So our determination is not different than Lynx's in that we ran Swoop, we owned Swoop, we operated Swoop, and our determination as a company was that that market segment can best be served within WestJet. So instead of having to stimulate 180 seats, you may only have to stimulate 40 or 60. And I think that addresses, we believe that is the path forward for Canadian travelers. We think that is what they want. And we'll come back in a year and find out how it's going. But we serve that market too, but it was not a day of celebration when an airline fails for us.
Thank you, Ms. Koutrakis. Mr. Iacono.
Thank you, and I thank you for being here today. Okay, given the diversification in my writing, I have had a lot of my people in my area that have complained because they go to places like Italy and the North Africa. So, what measures Air Canada and West and Air Transit will take to make international travel more affordable for people who find these travels really expensive? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Iacono, for your question. So, first of all, we also have a lot of employees who are in your riding, which is obviously in close to Montreal. I would tell you that all carriers have a serious record on price. We want to make sure we have products that are competitive and affordable. We've talked about, this competition is a global competition. We are here in competition with Royal Air Morocco. They also go to Italy. So for Canadian transporters, carriers, we must have a price that will be different from that of our competitive so that the travelers will choose to work with us because then we can create more jobs right here in Canada. Thank you for the question. In Air Transat, we're going to have our very first flight to Africa, to Marrakesh in June, and we are the only ones going to AT. So for us to serve these destinations, they're very important to us. When talking about the prices and the increase, I checked on the markets where we are. The increase of price for international destination is about 20 to 30% less than our competitors, and this is where we are in that market. When it comes to Italy, we have a very successful.
Very heavily subscribed, so that's bringing a Western component to Canada's connectivity to Europe. I think the reality in a market economy is that the European market was red hot last year. The Delta Airlines president said in February or March that they had already sold 75% of all of their transatlantic seats. So we are talking about the hottest, most sought after travel market in the summer in Canada. So, to your question, what can we do? Add more routes, fill the market void that we think exists, and we've done that in Western Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbons, and thank you, Mr. Iacono. Colleagues will now suspend until the vote has concluded. This meeting is now suspended. avec les
We're
questions.
going to start once again with the questions. And Mr. Bercelot-Duval, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, to talk about this topic that is very important, the state of competition for airlines in Canada. And I'm going to start with Air Transat, and the reason is very simple. It's because if we have this study today, it's because of the bankruptcy of Lynx Air. And in recent years, we see that WestJet acquired Sunwing. We have Flair that is currently in a difficult situation. Yes, Porter exists, but Porter isn't really doing any international flights. So Air Transat is really the only barrier against a potential monopoly by Air Canada and WestJet. But a little while ago, we were saying that a lot of people had a negative prognostic for Air Transat, saying it was going to go for bankruptcy. But no, it survived the pandemic, and now it looks like it has a pretty solid growth plan. So why were you able to resist, whereas some others went under? Thank you for the question. It's not obvious. It's really not easy at all. For us, the biggest challenge was really the pandemic. We have to say, and I talked about it during my comments, now we are very, very much in debt. If we hadn't had the pandemic and we hadn't acquired all those debts, the growth that Air Transat would have brought to the market would have been much, much higher. In spite of this, we are here to work with the government, with Parliament, to try to find a solution so that we can continue to grow. I spoke also about our alliance with Porter. We have a commercial agreement with them so that we can offer all Canadians and Quebecers more choices, more options. And we are going to continue growing systematically to add Marrakesh in Morocco, Lima in Peru, so we can continue adding more destinations. We also kept the only liaison between Montreal and Port-au-Prince in Haiti, and that's an option for travelers. Thank you. I have to say that I hear a lot from people around me that they know that they're going to have really good service in French with Air Transat, and that's very important. I think it's very important to have good service in French. So the other thing that I wanted to discuss is that during our previous meeting to this one, we have witnesses that talk to us about the fact that it is important for the future, something that would improve competition, is in fact the access to the right time slots for the flights in a lot of airports, but by also saying that it shouldn't be while negating the carriers that are already in place, for example, Canada. So when we said, do we need to slow the growth of Air Canada, they said, no, we don't want to do that. So how do we not limit the growth of Air Canada, but by allowing still the growth of other carrier? There's going to be a lot of work in those airports. I mean, the slots are, limited. So is there a matter of doing both? This is actually a question that is very important, and it's certainly a worry that we have. Toronto and Montreal will be literally construction zones for several years. So for us and for everybody else who is going to be there. So for the future, it is very important to work with airports so that we can have adequate access to the infrastructure, to the proper slots, to the proper gates in all of the airports. Otherwise, well, we're not going to be much competition, that's for sure. Is there any kind of particular mechanism that we could push that would allow this? No, not really. But it is, managed locally by the airports. We are a good partner with the airports, but it would be really good to have this reflex when we're talking about this issue to make sure that the competitors can also access adequately all the infrastructures of the airport, particularly, Montreal, Toronto, those big airports. Many have raised the issue that we have, user pay model. So they pay the fees, and this is based on the various costs from this infrastructure. In the rest of the world, it's different, is what we've heard. Airports are subsidized so they can function. And I'm going to ask the question, and maybe it's naive, to increase competition, to say, okay, we're going to fund the expansion of the infrastructure. So this investment could help increase competition, but would it be a good perspective? We want to allow the airport to increase, open new gates, but we're going to give those new slots first to the small companies. The question is from Mr. Liebman or Mr. Rio or any others would answer the question? On the model, okay, the issue that we have today is that there is a lot of debts in all the airports. The pandemic added a lot, and in many airports, airlines pay about like 12% of their revenues to the federal government. This money, it's going to the coffers of the federal government.
Le fédéral encaisse des centaines de millions par année.
So if the
government brings in several hundred million per year, the question is, where does this financing then come from? Because in the United States and Europe, this is money that is reinvested by the main governments, the central governments, because aviation is an essential economic engine. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Perhaps Mr. Barcelo Deval can ask that question the next time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today and answering our questions. Mr. Rio, I hope I pronounced that correctly, or close, Rio. The R's for the Anglophones are always a little challenging. You described Canada's airline sector as dynamic and competitive, and it seems like a message that is in stark contrast to the one that we heard at our last meeting when we heard from researchers and academics that work in this space and look at the structure of the air travel sector. And one of the questions that came up, and I thought it was a really good one, our chair right at the end of the meeting asked, essentially, what would prevent airlines if we were to take up this recommendation to reduce fees and charges and make it cheaper to operate an airline in Canada? What would prevent airlines from simply increasing their prices and charging the same amount to passengers and taking that as profit? And the answer we got back was nothing. Essentially, welcome to capitalism. That was basically the answer that we got. And so the question through to you would be, what is to ensure that those savings would be passed on to customers? Like we don't have I would argue that we don't have a very competitive airline industry. Certainly for the communities that I represent, they don't see that competition translating into lower prices. Right now, both Air Canada and WestJet are posting profits. I think Moody's projects that those profits are going to be even greater in 2024. It seems like you're doing fine under the current regulatory and tax and fee structure. Why do those need to be lower?
I would say first, as I mentioned in my remark, the market in Canada is very competitive if you compare it versus other jurisdictions. Permettez-moi de continuer en français.
Allow me to continue in French. Senate asked the same question as the chair asked the last time in 2012 when they submitted their report. If the taxes and fees would drop, what would happen? The consensus reached by the witnesses, and that was the recommendation of the study, is to base the cost basis, to have that cost basis. This would allow larger and smaller carriers to drive the market, and it's by stimulating that they'll be able to have more volume. As a result, more carriers can boost their capacity at lower fees. So it was my answer to the question is the chair's one. So what happens if fees are lowered? What would occur? And through which mechanism would these savings be transferred to the price of tickets? And the answer is competition, because if there are too many competitors to make any profit, that's where competition comes in.
then the barrier to entry for smaller carriers will be less, and there will be more competition, which theoretically would drive down prices. But the flip side of that is that someone has to pick up those costs. So the idea that's being presented, both by the airports and the airlines, is that the Canadian public should subsidize the air travel sector. This is the argument that we've heard. We should move from a user pay situation where air travelers pay the freight for the air travel sector to a situation where the government invests in air travel as a public good, part of the economy. This is the argument that we heard at our last meeting.
I would say we're not even at a user pay model here in Canada because there are revenue that are taken from the industry that are not reinvested. First example, the ground rent. Second example, fuel excise tax. If you look at the US, all amount that is taken from the industry is put into a trust fund that is reinvested in infrastructure. So this is more like a real user pay model. How you can take all the charge and fee that are taken from the industry and reinvest them in the industry. That's number one. And number two, sometimes we think that air travel, some people think that air travel only benefit people who travel. In fact, in an economy globalized like Canada, a lot of community rely on air travel, be it for tourism, for immigration, for trade. So there is definitely a public aspect to air travel that will justify government to support the infrastructure that are necessary to enable it.
Yeah, I take the point. It does benefit air travelers more than non-air travelers, though, and I think you would accept that. But I want to shift to this question around smaller rural markets. And you know that this is a real preoccupation of mine because constituents of mine are paying exorbitant costs to fly with Air Canada, short distances between communities like Smithers and Prince Rupert and Vancouver. And in the one market in Northwest BC where we see competition from WestJet, the flights are consistently cheaper. And we talked to Air Canada several years ago about this situation, and the message we received was, don't worry, WestJet's pricing is artificially low. Eventually things will stabilize and we'll see equity between those markets. We haven't seen that, and people are having to drive over 2 hours in order to access affordable flights. Why is there such a huge discrepancy between those markets?
I checked yesterday. Probably you make reference to Smithers and Terrace. I checked yesterday, and the basic fare difference is about $15, $15 to $20.
$15 to $20.
Of course, depends on the time of the day and the inventory available. But what we have done, we have increased capacity in Smithers. We have had a new flight this summer, and I'm just going to quote, what the mayor had said. I'm delighted to know a second flight is being added by Air Canada to the Smithers Regional Airport. She said, the new schedule will allow resident and business travel to plan more easily for connecting flight.
Merci.
So you can see that we're taking steps to increase capacity.
Merci, Monsieur Rowe. Thank you, Mr. Backrack. We'll go to the second round, and we'll start that with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Gibbons, I want to start with you. You mentioned kind of the history of WestJet coming up against Air Canada and overcoming that to become a dominant national carrier. You also talked about the high taxes and fees that the government imposes on airline travelers. In the last meeting, we came up with a figure, I believe it was somewhere between $100 and $150 for a round trip ticket before an airline takes $1 from a passenger. Would you say that's accurate, or do you have a different figure in terms of how much the government and the airports, the CATSA, NAV Canada, what is if someone's trying to buy a ticket, how much of that right off the top is going to government or federally regulated entities?
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. The figure we've used is about that publicly. We say about, for a return flight domestic, it's about $160 before the WestJet Group base fare is applied. So we think that's high. Lynx thought that was high, but most importantly for this discussion is it stifles competition because you can only stimulate the market so much when you're starting at $161. And I think that's the issue, and that's the issue you see in your community with your constituents going to Washington State. They don't have better planes, better crews, better staff, better service, but they're there because of that barrier that has nothing to do with our company.
Right. So the government taxes and fees actually make U.S. airports a competitor to Canadian airports and make U.S. airlines a competitor to Canadian airlines. So what? I guess I want to give a quote here from the Montreal Economic Institute that says Ottawa prefers to treat our airports as cash cows rather than the essential transportation infrastructure that they are. Do you agree with that statement?
I think that's the record, honestly. The government does over-collect for its services that they provide to the Canadian traveler. And I think it's about the traveler and it's about the consumer. And just one quick example is CATSA. Nothing against CATSA's leadership. They're doing their best job for the people of Canada. But that fee was raised 29.5%. And, we have questions as to whether that money, like that is a fee paid by our guests. We believe that money should be held in public trust and that it should be directly tied to the services rendered by the organization. But it's not that straight a line, and it's quite confusing at times to understand where the fee goes versus what the allocation of budget is to the organization. And then the new concern that we have, Mr. Strahl, is that in fact the fees that travelers are paying for their security are sometimes going to general revenues, and that there's an overpay. So just a small example of where a fee goes, and we just think that if consumers are paying that fee and our guests are paying that fee, there should be a greater level of transparency around it.
So is it your testimony today then that if the government was to reduce these fees overall to lower taxes, lower airport rents, reduce the fees that they charge for things like security to make it more competitive with the U.S., if these fees were reduced from $161 by this government, would that have a positive effect on your offerings? Would you be able to offer more routes and more competitive pricing to your customers? And do you think that other entrants like Lynx, which has failed, there's I think 8 that have failed since the early 2000s. Do you believe that by cutting fees and becoming more competitive on the fee side, that it would increase competition in the Canadian airspace?
Any doubt about this? This is what the witnesses said on Tuesday. And on top of that, we've fallen victim in this country to it's just $3, it's just $4, it's just $5. And I think we've just had a cumulative impact of these fees. And, the most measurable impact, Mr. Strahl, is the 7 million Canadians who use U.S. border airports for no other reason than the issue you're asking about. And if we could repatriate those, yes, if we could have, why are we gifting the United States and those companies those travelers? That's right. We should arrest that, and we should work to arrest that. But just one more quick comment. Our guests are paying these fees, and they're overpaying. This isn't a tax cut or something to be conferred upon a Canadian company that you may or may not think acts in the public interest. This is about the traveler and what they're paying.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony and this interesting discussion so far. I'm just going to pick up on a comment that was just made, which is that something I think I heard that it's 7 million Canadian travelers using U.S. airports, and so it was attributed to fees. We heard the other day, that the key challenge for the Canadian air industry is the size of our country combined with the lower population. So to what degree do you think the U.S. airlines are more competitive because of the basic structure of the U.S. with 10 times the population of Canada and similar size versus that it's about fees?
I just want to add, thanks for your question,
Yeah.
Ms. Murray. Merci beaucoup. my colleague, my counterpart said that, there is 7 million Canadian travelers that fly from the US. That's an indication that it's cheaper there. But I will also give you another indication. If you look at the US carriers' presence in Canada, since the pandemic, outside the 4 major airports in Canada, the presence of US carriers in Canada and other airports is down by 40%. A lot of routes have not been reestablished by US carriers in Canada. Because for them, when they have to decide how to allocate an aircraft, they look at many opportunities. And, allocating an aircraft in Canada or in the US, it's the same aircraft, it's the same crew. So the fact that they're not coming back to Canada shows that there is a cost challenge here that we should address together.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And as I understood, the Canadians are voting with their wallets and it's cheaper. I was asking whether it's cheaper because of the structure of the US market in terms of the number of people that travel compared with the Canadian market. But anyway, I want to move on to something else. So I'd like to, Mr. Liebman, I'd like to just explore a little bit about your joint venture with Porter Airlines, and can you kind of paint for us the picture of how that makes Air Transat more competitive than otherwise you would be?
Sure. So very briefly, given time, we have historically been a point-to-point international carrier. You caught a Transat flight in Quebec City, Montreal, Toronto, Halifax, Moncton, where have you, and you flew to an international destination. The joint venture with Porter is a commercial agreement. We're two separate companies and will remain so. What it does is it allows people, as Porter begins to grow its service from all across Canada, as cities across the country and all across North America, they will bring flights and passengers in to connect with Air Transat's international flights. So you can buy a ticket in Winnipeg or Regina or Edmonton, fly to Toronto or Montreal and on to Lyon or Bordeaux or to Rome, for example. So that's a new choice in competition with perhaps Air Canada, perhaps WestJet, perhaps a foreign carrier. It's an additional option for Canadian travelers and will be competitive.
We've talked about fees. We understand that user fees have the customer bear the cost of the experience as opposed to the taxpayer. Is there something that the government can do to remove barriers or increase the opportunities for the kinds of cooperative arrangements that you're describing as a possible reduction of the challenges to competition and service here in Canada?
So just again, very quickly at a high level, Transat, Porter, there are others that were closed for the pandemic and have hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. We have to look at those programs. They saved the companies. It worked. They saved jobs. But these debts are accumulating. The interest on them are accumulating. How do we go forward and protect competition at the same time? In the hub airports where those two will connect, how do we make sure there's adequate and fair access to the infrastructure, especially since they're going to be undergoing a lot of construction over the next years?
And facilitate those kinds of arrangements. Perhaps you could put a few ideas on paper. Wanted to get to my last question.
Fortunately, Ms. Murray, there's no time left. I'm being very strict today.
Greenhouse gas emissions. Anyway,
OK. Prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole. 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you've got 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I'd like to begin with Mr. Réau. During our last meeting, which you no doubt listened to, we spoke about the issue of general air transportation, in which Air Canada plays a major role. And almost everybody, and again, as we heard today as well, has mentioned the issues of the user fees and taxes, which are borne by the consumer, and this has a result of increasing the price. I noted, and I've indicated, that perhaps if we were to subsidize flights for people who want to travel south, destinations, this might be more acceptable for the everyday Canadian if we were to accept to subsidize part of air transportation for part of those passengers in remote regions. What does Air Canada think about this, if I may? And again, this would enable you perhaps to play a more important role in the area compared to what you're doing now. Thank you very much, Mr. Barcelo Duval. First of all, yes, we are in the Quebec region. We're in Sept-Îles and Chicoutimi, Bagotville, Quebec City, in Noranda, and the Michael Islands as well. Yes, the Quebec government, in fact, has been actively working on this. They have implemented a program helping passengers. This allows us to provide access to lower rates for users. That is, it is up to the passenger to choose. And for example, for a $500 ticket, that's up to them. Yes, initiatives can be put in place in order to reduce the rates, but it's up to the person to choose the carrier with which he or she would like to travel. Mr. Gibbons, I think you'd like to add something.
First and foremost, I would submit that we have to stop going in the other direction on fees before we start talking about subsidies. And this is partially what happened in Europe. Europe created this massive industry around EU 261, where billions and billions of dollars went into that program. And the result was that regional travel became so expensive and unprofitable that the state had to begin subsidizing regional routes. I don't think we want to go that route in Canada.
I'll interrupt you because I don't have a lot of time before the speaker, before the president, the chairperson interrupts me. Can you submit a written response? The issue of taxes and fees, you mentioned that some of this revenue is not reinvested. I would like to know, beyond the lease fees, what are these taxes and fees that are not reinvested?
Airport rents is the most obvious one that's been talked about for decades, even at this committee, and you were part of the group that made recommendations to make sure that that rent goes back into the industry. The excise tax on jet fuel is a tax that is not reinvested into the industry. That is something in the United States that is.
Thank you very much.
We're done.
Mr. Bachrach, floor is yours. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to switch gears for a brief moment to address an issue that emerged recently with Air Canada. And Mr. Royal, I know you'll be familiar with this. There was a challenge faced by Grand Chief Woodhouse on her flight with Air Canada, in which I believe her regalia was taken away from her, or the carrying container was removed from her possession. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Air Canada will be addressing that situation, what policy changes will be forthcoming, and how your company has responded.
Je vous remercie pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Bachrach. Yes, I'm familiar with that incident which happened last week, and it was the cover of a traditional hat which was put in the heritage area. We apologize for the situation. Our CEO talked to the chief, and we committed to review the training with our flight crew when they have to deal with items, sacred items, such as those. And also, we will raise more awareness and come up with SOPs in order to facilitate the travel of such items, and people would have to reach out to us ahead of time to ensure that transportation is provided for and everything goes smoothly without any obstacles.
Could you provide the committee with a sense of when that review and that training will be completed, and would you be willing to report back to the committee and inform its members of what changes your company is going to make as a result?
I can tell you that we're already coming up with procedures, and as explained, we would have a system where people would inform us ahead of time if they're traveling with religious items or sacred items, and that work has already started. And yes, I can do a follow-up with the committee on the next steps. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gibbons, I want to continue our conversation. We've seen NAV Canada fees since the pandemic have gone up 29%. You mentioned CATSA fees in the last budget were raised 29%. We've seen the rents paid, airport rents paid to the government have increased by 42.5% in the last decade. Do you believe, that as the government keeps on layering on fees that they impose on customers who are trying to fly, driving up the costs for Canadian travelers, it appears to me that the government really has no interest in increasing air travel across the country, and in fact, through increasing taxes and fees, may in fact want to decrease air travel in the country. Do you have any opinion on that? Have you seen any indication from the government that they actually have a goal that they want to increase air travel in this country, or do they want to decrease it?
I'm going to drive right by that one. I think that's a question for the minister when he's here. What I can tell you is that
he won't come, but he's indicated he won't come. But
in communities across the country, the response to what we're doing is very, very positive, Mr. Strahl, right? And look, this is what the experts have said. Canada is a high tax and regulatory burden, and reorienting and modernizing those policies is going to help competition. And, the motion before the committee is in light of Lynx Airlines' failure. And Lynx Airlines cited reasons for, in their opinion, their failure. And I think, this was a very well capitalized airline. They had ownership from one of the most savvy airline operators in the world, and they failed. So I think, there are challenges, and I think what you went through CATSA, NAV Canada, rents, and AIFs, and I think the common denominator with all of them is that there's a lot of debt to dig out of from the pandemic, and that debt, whether it's airlines, whether it's those organizations, is all being felt by the traveler, and we're in an affordability crisis. So again, back to APPR. Every community, every small airline, every small region, everyone across the country has said this is not the time to increase the cost of travel. We can protect Canadian travelers, but we also should not be increasing costs at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibbons. And further to sorry to interrupt you, the Minister of Transport was invited, and we have no indication that he has accepted that invitation to talk about this with us. I wanted to discuss as well something you talked about in your remarks about intermodal equity in terms of how the government supports different modes of transport in the country. We just had a lengthy study on high-frequency rail in Canada. Do you believe that that we need to address issues about the lack of competition or the competitive environment in the airspace, in the aerospace sector, in air travel in this country before we look at massively investing in a mode of transport that won't be available? I know you're focused on the West. I can tell you that none of my constituents would ever use an HFR. They'd have to fly on one of your jets 3,000 kilometers to get on to the start of that. So my question would be, do you believe that we need to look at the competitiveness and investments in the air sector before we can have a fulsome look at things like high-speed rail or bus service, as has been mentioned before? Do you believe that the government has done that work to look at how we can improve connectivity via the airspace before investing 10, 20, or $30 billion in a new HFR?
And on the before or after the sequencing, I would just observe that, there is a high, and this comes from our conversations with provinces and with premiers. And if you look at Newfoundland and Labrador, just as an example, the citizens of Newfoundland and Labrador pay for all of their infrastructure, all of their security, and they overpay for those services while we have outdated transportation policies that subsidize rail. I'm not saying rail shouldn't be subsidized or should be subsidized. I'm just observing if the issue is how the regions of this country can all be connected properly and affordably, that is an issue that should be looked at naturally and logically, because your citizens in Chilliwack do not benefit from that. It is air that is needed for your community and for remote regions of British Columbia. So I think that's an issue, and we've put it in our submission and our recommendations to say, as part of the review of fees, there should be comparisons made to how other modes of transport are treated.
Thank you.
And I think that's a basic fairness question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbons, and thank you, Mr. Stroll. Next, I'll turn it over to Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A very enlightening conversation. I'm not going to get and start speaking about the politics of what we're trying to discuss today, and of course, some of the answers that some of the people around this horseshoe are trying to get out of you to further that agenda. I am going to concentrate my questions on the business at hand, and that is to, in fact, deal with the state of airline competition here in Canada, and ultimately the ability that we have as partners to, in fact, make it better for the consumer, whether it be through cost or whether it be through connectivity. So I'm really going to concentrate in this session to you, Mr. Liebman, with respect to Air Transat, and the following session with Mr. Jones from Flair, specifically on the how to the what. I just basically underlined and bolded what the what is. Now it's the how. So I'm going to give you the floor because you're not answering to me. Your testimony is going to this young lady over here to then therefore be contained within the final report that's going to be presented to this committee, which in fact will go to the department for response from the department, and then hopefully from there a strategy to actually get it done. So with that, very simple question. How did you do it? How do we learn from you with respect to encouraging further competition? How did you stay afloat? What investments did you make from the operating to capital side? How can we learn from you to then ensure that level, that foundation that we can move forward with respect to strategy can be embarked upon?
Thanks very much for the question. And, right off the top, I want to reiterate Air Transat and the 5,000 employees of Transat are here to work with Parliament and to work with government to protect and enhance competition in Canada. For 37 years, Air Transat has been taking Canadians on their mostly leisure trips, on their international trips, sometimes on their trips back home, but also bringing hundreds of thousands of visitors to this country, primarily from Europe, every year as well. And we've grown from one plane to today almost 40 to 5,000 employees. So we have just kept in our lane. We've focused on the business, and it's a testament to the professionalism of my colleagues. We had a very major challenge, a very major upset in the pandemic. When the borders are closed, there are just no operations, there are just no revenues. And obviously, that was the biggest challenge we had in our 37-year history. Thankfully, and thanks to the government emergency support, we're still here. And we intend to keep doing what we've been doing for the past 37 years in a bigger and better way, and in a new way, with new partners, reaching out to the likes of Porter and others. We have a co-chairing agreement with WestJet as well. We're here to work with anyone and everybody with a view to delivering reliable air service and to compete in the marketplace.
On that, maybe not a question you can't answer now, but I'd be very interested in knowing this. If you can send it to me, is your debt to operating ratio? What is your debt to operating right now?
I'll get that for you, but remember, we never had a penny of debt up until...
That's why I'm asking.
We had 700 million of cash, in fact. So the 700 million's gone, and we have 800 million that we owe to the Crown, and it's ginormous. It's a ratio that is too large, and it's one that we need to get under control to be able to do what we need to do in this market.
Impeding on your debt, your operating budget, because you're probably financing a lot of that debt through your operating.
Absolutely the case. And again, I want to stress, not through any fault of our own, because we never had any before the pandemic, but it is what it is, and we've got to deal with it.
And with that, it's always easy to say that government can simply just give you a check, but with some of the investments that you're making through your operating, especially as it goes to capital one-time expenditures, a lot of that debt can be alleviated, or the impact on your operating can be alleviated if, in fact, the government starts actually participating in some of the other expenditures that you're actually accruing year over year.
And I'll say as well, there were other models. We're very grateful for the support we got. It was purely debt. There was an investment made, $500 million in the equity of Air Canada, for example. So there are other models in Europe. There were massive, investments and forgivenesses. So there are options on the table to make sure that whether it's Transat or Porter or whichever carrier needs the support, that we make it through that pandemic hole, and then we grow and enhance competition in the country.
I'm going to speak with you for another
It'd be a pleasure.
The chair won't let me.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Blame me. I want to thank our witnesses who appeared before us in the first round. It is truly great to have all three of you here appearing in person. We thank you very much for that. Colleagues, I ask that you remain seated as we suspend for 2 minutes and let the team welcome our next round of witnesses. This meeting stands suspended. Order. Colleagues, appearing before us for the second half, we have from Abbotsford International Airport, Mr. Parm Sidhu, General Manager by video conference. Welcome to you. We have from Flair Airlines, Mr. Stephen Jones, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you. And from National Airlines Council of Canada, we have Mr. Jeff Morrison, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you. As discussed, I will be asking for unanimous consent to forego our traditional opening remarks and to have those submitted electronically and included as testimony so that we can go straight to a line of questioning. Do I have unanimous consent? Seeing no objections, so adopted. With that, I will be turning the floor over to you, Mr. Williams. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Jones, happy to have you here from Flair Airlines. You are a competitor. We need more of you in Canada, and happy to talk to you today and talk about competition in Canada. Mr. Jones, I'm going to start right out. Being a new airline competing in Canada, have you seen any uncompetitive behavior? And if so, what behavior are you seeing that's happening to stopping you from being a better airline and competing at more routes?
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. We've seen anti-competitive behavior in the market. I think it's pretty clear to us that the presence of Flair in the market is threatening to the major carriers, what we call Big Air, the two big duopoly carriers, WestJet and Air Canada. I think if you look back at the history, you can see the formation of Swoop. Swoop was not created to promote competition. Swoop was a weapon designed to quell competition. We've seen it deployed against us around the market. Some great examples, Edmonton to Comox. We entered that market. Swoop immediately followed us a month later, same time, same days of week. When we pulled out, they pulled out. So it's there's some real, I guess, active deployment of capacity against us. And so yes, it's a tough market.
When it comes to these complaints, and this is what can stomp an airline out, we had another airline, Lynx Air, that is gone, and we've had others in the past. We had a witness yesterday talked about 6 panels of airlines that have gone bankrupt in Canada. What is the government doing to help you when you're finding and you're seeing uncompetitive behavior like you just mentioned?
So on those, there has been no assistance on as it turns to predatory behaviour. I think the fact that Flair exists is a product of government policy. I think the 2018 policy that loosened up foreign ownership was one of the things that allowed capital to flow into Flair. And we have a great relationship with the government, but in terms of specific anti-competitive behaviour, there's nothing that I've seen.
And the government knows about this? You've made complaints to the government and they're not doing anything?
So Flair, and this was prior to my time, did make specific complaint around Swoop and Abbotsford, but it came to nothing.
I mentioned in our last panel examples of where you're in a market and it's decreasing prices is what happens. And normally when we have competition, we have increased service, decreased prices. Toronto to Vancouver, which you were in a date that we looked at, versus Toronto to Ottawa, the presence of your airline seems to bring prices down to about $385 average for those airlines, where you're not in a market, which is Toronto to Ottawa, which is 9 times less the distance from Toronto to Vancouver, seems to be a price of $585 for those airlines. So it seems like you're decreasing those prices. How do we get you into Toronto and Ottawa, that route?
So you raise a great point, and this is what we call the Flair effect. When Flair enters a market, it brings prices down for all the participants in the market. The Flair effect, on average, has resulted in 34% reduction in fares in the markets that we operate relative to what it was prior, and that's for all Canadians. So whether people like Flair or not, people should be thankful that Flair is in there and competing because we bring that benefit. We've estimated that to be in excess of $700 million since Flair really started to accelerate in 2021. $700 million of money that's gone into the pockets of Canadians at a time when affordability is one of the big questions on everyone's lips at the moment. Prices are going up across the board. Flair's doing the opposite. We're pulling prices down. And that money that stays in the customer's pocket flows through the economy generally, so good for everyone. The specific example you raise, to Toronto, Ottawa is a market that's actually just dominated by the big guys, and we don't believe that we could compete effectively there.
What specifically would be the barriers that you'd see to enter that market and to compete?
So it's a relatively short market. It's got expensive airport costs at either end, and so the ability to amortize those airport costs over, per mile means that every mile that you operate is relatively expensive. So lower airport costs at either end would certainly make a difference.
In terms of taxes, we talked about it. We've heard a lot of testimony that taxes seem to be higher across Canada, across the airports. Do you find that a barrier as well? Are taxes from this government a barrier to entry?
Undoubtedly. I mean, Canada is a very expensive place to do business. I've worked in airlines around the world. I was 16 years at Air New Zealand. I was chair of the Star Alliance Management Board during that time. I was 3 years as the managing director and deputy CEO of Wizz Air in Europe, one of the world's best ULCCs. And you see the decision-making that's made by airlines, and the cost of doing business really impacts our network decisions.
Air Canada testified, they said there's more competition in Canada than those other jurisdictions. So maybe you can comment about Australia, New Zealand, other parts of Europe. Does Canada have enough competition?
So I did hear the comments, and I was wondering, how much time it's spent in Europe, because Europe is a very, very competitive market, and ultra low-cost carriers operate there quite successfully. I think absent Flair, Canadian airfares would be much higher. I think absent Flair, the competition in this country would revert back to what it was like previously, where you had to pay $800 to fly for an hour and a half. It just shouldn't be that way. When we came, I think one of our biggest competitors was actually the couch. Just people had given up on the concept of affordable travel, and so they just stay at home. And so we have got people off the couch. We've got them flying around the country more often to more places.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones, and thank you, Mr. Williams. Next, we have Mr. Yacono. Mr. Yacono, la parole est à vous. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Over to you, Mr. Yacono.
Mr. Jones, I have a question for you. They say that when my colleague said when competition exists, we have decreased services and low prices. Is that correct? Also, WestJet representative stated earlier that no American company wants to fly out of Canada because of what the disadvantages that exist and also high taxes. But I want to also put up a point that taxes were much higher when the Conservatives were in power prior to 2015 than what they are today. Now, continuing on that point, if we don't have no American company wanting to fly in Canada, and you're a Canadian company, is that correct? And you're a Canadian company. So what does that give you guys? All the Canadian companies that are flying out of Canada, what does it give you guys as the pie? Do you have a bigger part of the pie? Because, according to WestJet, he's highlighting the disadvantages because no American company wants to be here. But yet, if an American company was in Canada, flying out of Canada, what would happen to all the Canadian companies flying out of Canada? Would you be still laughing and giggling and being happy that you're making good money? Or would you be concerned that you have a bigger competitor in the arena?
So I'm fundamentally a free marketeer. I believe that competition is good. I think that if we saw an open market, we will see better outcomes for consumers generally. Obviously, the airline industry is one that's full of regulations that go back, to the beginning of civil aviation in time, and the cabotage, the flying within a country by foreign carriers is generally limited. But competition is good for customers.
So, sir, you're in a company and you're in business to make money, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when you make a profit, do you share your profit with the Canadian government?
Through taxation, we would. We haven't got to that point yet.
Well,
yeah.
We all pay taxes,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Yeah.
So you don't share your profits. You don't give your profits over to Canada. So you're in business to make money and to offer a service and make money for it. So do you agree with me to say that is it the fault of the Canadian government why the airline industry is having such difficulty? Or is it the fault of the Canadian government why all airline companies are making a profit?
So I dispute the last fact, but because the airline industry, I think in its entire history is, if you added it up, has never made much money. But I think this is an expensive place to do business. And what is incontrovertible fact is that if there were lower costs in the system, more people could afford to fly.
Tell us, Mr. Jones, how do you manage to remain in competition amongst Air Canada, WestJet, and Air Transit?
So we have a very simple model. It's keeping our costs as low as possible and passing that on to customers in the form of lower fares. We do that through two things. The first is to run an efficient business. And the second is to provide choice to customers around what it is that we charge for.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Badaway, the remainder of the time is yours.
Thank you. Same question, Mr. Jones, as I asked earlier to Mr. Liebman with respect to how did you do it, or how are you doing it with respect to keeping your nose above water and becoming more of a competitor here domestically?
So I'm not going to pretend it's been an easy journey. It hasn't, but we are still here. We've done it without any specific support from the government, with the exception of the RATI funding of $11 million that we received, and that went directly to encouraging regional connections. So we didn't get the $270 million that Porter got, or the $370 million that Sunwing got, or the $800 million that Transat got, or the $5 billion that Air Canada got. We have been funded privately. And it's very tough, but we do it again by being very focused on our business model. So we know what we're about. We're about low cost, low fare, affordable travel for all Canadians, and being pure to that model. And so it's a model that's worked in jurisdictions around the world. We believe there's nothing about Canada that makes it so different that an ultra low cost model shouldn't work here. I hear a lot about it's different in Canada. I'm here to tell you it's not. Every country is nuanced, but Australia is a big country like Canada. It's got 28 million people. Most of the people live within 100 miles of the coastline. It's got half a dozen big cities, and it's got 53 aircraft, and Jetstar is an ultra low cost carrier. Chile is a long, thin country. It's got 4 or 5 big cities. It's got 17 million people. It's got 3 airlines. 2 of them are low cost carriers, and so there's nothing specific about Canadians or Canada to say that they don't deserve affordable travel. They do deserve affordable travel, and Flair's here to deliver it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jones, and I give you that credit. That integrity that you're bringing to the sector is very much appreciated, as well as I'm a big fan of the Flair effect. So well done. I guess I'm going to pivot over to, in my last question, to, in a broader sense, as it relates to what we're trying to do to ensure and strengthen our supply chain. Although a lot of people think supply chain is all about moving trade, I think supply chain is also about moving people as well, sometimes even with trade. We are moving forward with HFR. We are looking at other different methods of transportation, marine being a part of that, especially in the west end and the east end of the country, both on the ocean, but as well in the Great Lakes. How do you see the airline sector actually fitting into that multimodal capacity to give more of not only a choice, but also more connectivity to the traveler, especially in some of those remote areas?
So I think air travel is fundamental to that. I think it's actually, a free market for air travel will see the connectivity come. This is a big country that will require certain measures taken for more remote communities. There's no doubt about that. But for the big connections, air travel is, I think, the most logical way. It's fast. It's actually, the assets are relatively cheap relative to a long-term rail build or anything like that. So I think air travel actually should be at the forefront of the policy around connectivity for communities.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and well done.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here to both of our witnesses. I'm interested in this. You were mentioning, Mr. Jones, the swoop effect and how in certain markets where you were trying to compete, swoop would come in, drive the pricing down, and essentially chase you out of the market and then leave themselves. When they did that, when they came in with ultra low pricing as a form of anti-competitive behavior, were they making any money, or was this a money-losing venture that was part of a larger picture for the company?
So we analysed them closely. We're a very analytical company, and it's hard to imagine they were making any money on that. No, absolutely not.
So one of the policy approaches that's been suggested by some experts in this field is that the government should establish a pricing floor both for low-cost carriers and for larger airlines that are seeking to compete with them, and that would provide some breathing room so that you don't get this sort of race to the bottom followed by the exit of certain airlines and prices going back up. What do you think of this regulatory approach?
So I disagree with it. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think regulating prices in airline markets works anywhere around the world. In fact, in many markets, it doesn't. It will only encourage inefficiency. I think competition is good. Competition drives efficiency, but predatory behavior needs to be monitored closely. And there needs to be a faster intervention mechanism for predatory behavior, because by the time we make a complaint, we go through the process, we submit our evidence, it's too late. You know, you've burnt $10 million. And so and you have to get out of there. So the processes around regulating predatory behavior, I think, are too slow.
In those cases, how would you define predatory behavior? Or how does the law define it?
Well, it's a good, I mean, this is why it takes so long to get a ruling on it, because it's a free market and people can choose to fly where they want to fly. But when the evidence is that it hasn't been served forever on the market, we go and enter into it. Someone comes and sits in on the same day of week, same time of day, a month after we start. We end up saying, well, we can't live there. We get out and then they get out. You can draw your own conclusions.
The NDP recently tabled Bill C-352, which this is the Lowering Prices for Canadians Act, which seeks to strengthen the Competition Act to avoid some of these anti-competitive behaviors. And it was intended, you know, first and foremost for sectors like the grocery sector, where we're seeing some pretty extreme price gouging. But I wonder whether you're familiar with the bill and whether it would have an impact on the kind of thing that you're talking about when it comes to predatory anti-competitive behavior.
I'm sorry, Ms. Backrack, I'm not familiar in detail with it, but you know, being relatively new to Canada, I do hear a lot of complaints about just almost there's an acceptance of the fact that you have these oligopolies that will control prices in different industries in Canada, and there's an acceptance by Canadians that that's just the way it is in Canada. It's the price we pay for living in this beautiful country. I'm here to disagree with that. I think we need more competition. I think it delivers better prices, more efficient companies. It's better for all Canadians.
Now, there's some markets that simply aren't large enough to facilitate competition. And you mentioned earlier, you said in a country like Canada, there need to be certain measures for remote communities. I represent a region that is all rural and remote communities. And we do see that behavior where you have mostly a single carrier in many of the markets and some exorbitant pricing. What regulatory approach do you think the government should take, if any, to ensure that rural Canadians have affordable air travel?
So one approach might be to offer a revenue subsidy of some sort that is there to be bid on by other airlines. So it's a very transparent subsidy that the most efficient airlines will be able to make the most of. And so I think it's that would be one mechanism.
Similar to the provincial program in Quebec, or there's also a program in the United States, I understand, that subsidizes some.
Sure, and you see it
markets.
in parts of Europe as well, and in Scandinavia.
Do you agree with the statement made earlier by our representative from Air Canada that Canada has a dynamic and competitive airline?
I'd say Canada's been a cozy duopoly for too long, and Canadians have been paying too much for too long. And that Flair has, and Lynx alongside us until they exited the market, has disrupted that. And it would certainly be in the best interest of the duopoly for Flair to fail, but we're not going to. So I think, you know, absent Flair, prices will go straight back up to where they used to be.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Backrack. Et finalement, pour aujourd'hui, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
And
Mr.
to finish, we have
6 minutes, please.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here. I am going to start with Mr. Jones from Flair. The question that I have for you is that earlier I asked a question that's similar to the people from Air Transat. I'm going to speak a bit slower for translation. It was mentioned in previous testimony that access to the gates and to the advantageous slots in airports could be an issue if we want to ensure a proper competition, you know, at least a functional competition. So I want to know, from your perspective, does Flair Airlines, have you had issues with being able to access to gates? I mean, if you don't have a gate, you can't have a flight. If you don't have a proper time slot, you can't have a flight. Is this an issue for you? And is there anything we can do to ensure that there is a healthy competition to improve proper access in terms of the access to gates and access to slots?
But I did not get a translation.
Mr. Jones, we're going to look into that, and we're going to make sure the time is stopped for Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Oui, je vais juste faire un petit test avec
I just want to do a test with the interpretation. Is there interpretation? Can you hear interpretation? Is it functioning? We're going to do another test to see if interpretation is functioning. Can you hear me, Mr. Jones? Yes, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, I'm going to ask you your question once again. Okay, so my question is to know, is the access to gate and slots, is it an issue to ensure that we have healthy competition, minimum competition? Is this an issue for Flair Airlines? Is this an issue you've had or an issue that you think you will be having in the next few years? How can we ensure that a new player or a smaller player has access to the gates and to the slots? If you don't have gates, if you don't have slots, you can't have any flights.
It's an excellent question. The issue really is in Toronto Pearson Airport. In other airports, the availability of slots is much less of a constraint. But it certainly is in Toronto Pearson, where the slots are controlled by the existing players. I think, for example, as Sunwing got folded into WestJet, WestJet got control of another big bundle of slots in there. Part of our submissions in the public interest review there was that slots should have been distributed more generally. So access to slots in Pearson is a real issue.
I think,
unless I'm mistaken, that you are not in Montreal. Is there a reason why you're not in Montreal? Are you thinking that you're going to be in Montreal at some point?
So we do operate to Montreal. We do. We also looked a lot at Saint-Hubert as a potential port. It's one of the most high-cost airports in the country. There's no doubt about that. But there is a good market. We enjoy operating to Montreal, but it is a very expensive airport.
Maybe another question for you. Several witnesses so far have mentioned the problem with the foreign shareholders. Some of them mentioned the rule of 25% as being a rule that is maybe unnecessary, and maybe removing this particular rule would mean that the majority of shares would still be in Canada, but there would be a better possibility of investment from foreign owners. Do you agree with this?
So I do agree with it. I think loosening up access to investment is good for competition because investment from Canadians tends to have a more risk-averse tone to it. And so opening up to a broader investment universe is good. The controls around foreign ownership are dealt with differently in different countries. So for New Zealand, for example, it's wide open, but the government owns a special share, which gives it certain powers to protect the interests of the country. So there are different ways that it can be approached, but I would certainly favour lifting the foreign ownership level from the 25 to 49% as a first step.
Another issue that I'd like to address with you. Many witnesses, once again, have spoken with the cost being too high, all taxes and fees. They basically are added to the price of the ticket. From your perspective, and I think you agree with this, if I understand you correctly, do you have an example in particular where you say, okay, why do we pay so much money for this service if we compare it with other services that are similar in the world? Are there places where you see that there are inefficiencies, for example?
I think the AIF's the perfect example for this. I mean, it's one of the very few products that I've ever come across that you have to pay today for a potential future benefit. You wouldn't see that in any consumer good where you go and, buy a car now and pay extra to General Motors for what development they might do for the future. So AIFs are a really good example, and there's no control on it. There is no incentive on airports to reduce costs. The only example is Mr. Palmsudou here, I think, is a great example of an airport that's focused on reducing costs. Kitchener-Waterloo as well is another great example. But generally, there is no incentive in the system for people to reduce costs. And we know through our everyday pricing, what we see in the market, every dollar makes a difference. Every dollar of cost means someone else isn't traveling. Some Canadian can't afford to travel, stays at home on the couch. And so the costs in the system are a barrier to the access to affordable travel.
Merci, Mr. Barcel-Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Barcel-Duval.
And thank you, Mr. Sidhu, for being with us today and for lending us your testimony. With that, this meeting is adjourned.